Welcome to Fear Street.
I'm a guy, and I used to be a bartender. I was working a shift one night and started chatting with a girl. She seemed nice enough, so I asked her out, and a couple days later we went on a casual date. We just met up for a cup of coffee and a chat. My next shift at the bar, she turned up alone and sat at the end of the bar. I was just doing my job and started having a laugh and a joke with one of the regulars when the girl stormed over and started full-blown screaming at the girl I was talking to. She told her, "Stop flirting with my boyfriend." It almost got physical, and the bouncers were already over, standing by to chuck her out. I told her that I wasn't her boyfriend and that we'd been on one date that lasted an hour. And if that's how she was going to react when I just talked to another woman, especially when I'm just serving a customer, she could get lost. She screamed at me and stormed off. I woke up the next day to about 50 text messages. They started with, "I'm sorry," and "Why aren't you answering?" Then a ton of abuse before she would apologize for that. And the whole process would start over again. I blocked her number. On my next work shift, she came screaming into the bar, begging for forgiveness, saying that she was sorry, and asked me to unblock her number. I told her in no uncertain terms to leave me alone. She screamed and left. Then a few nights later, I was going to bed. I turned off my bedroom light, and my phone went off. I had a text from a number I didn't recognize that just said goodnight. I looked out of my window. She was parked across the street, watching my house. That went on for a week or two. Then the strangest thing happened. I was at work, and she walked in, came to the bar, and told me she was there with her new boyfriend. I breathed a sigh of relief while pitying the poor dude. Then her new boyfriend walked in. He was my absolute doppelganger. I mean, people could have mistaken us for twins. He even wore the same glasses I did. I was standing there in shock, and she introduced this guy to me as her ex. It's only funny looking back now, but the look on the guy's face when he saw me was just pure, "She's insane." She made a big deal of wrapping herself around him all night in front of me, while he looked more and more uncomfortable. Then, at some point, he left, and she tried to get behind the bar crying hysterically that she was only dating him to make me jealous, and that she loved me. I went straight to the police station and reported her, and asked how to get a restraining order, but I never ended up needing one. Being removed from the front of my house on another late-night camping session by the police scared her into leaving me alone. I once received a text from a number I didn't recognize telling me to look outside. I lived in a first-floor apartment, and there were flowers and chocolates on my balcony. The guy worked for IT at my company and was in a position that he had access to the employee records, so apparently he got my cell number and address out of it. What was even crazier was I told my upstairs neighbor to keep an eye out for him, and she said he'd stalked her too. Apparently this guy had a reputation for stalking every new girl in town. It escalated over the course of the year, but was more absurd than terrifying because the stuff he did was so bizarre. Following the flowers, a coworker told him I was a gamer. He built me a PC and left it on the balcony of my apartment where he'd left the flowers. Apparently, he didn't think I was smart enough to try it out, because it was literally an empty case with the blank faceplate still on the back and a gaping hole where the power supply ought to be. After that, he comes into my office in front of all my coworkers and asks to talk to me. I'm like, oh God, no. He gets down on one knee, grabs my hand, and literally jams a ring onto my finger and pours his heart out and proposes. I didn't even manage to laugh. I was just so completely perplexed. I just stood there with my mouth hanging open like a fish and didn't say anything. He told me to think it over and took off. I'm 90% sure the ring came out of one of those gumball machine dispensers. At this point, I've told him not to contact me anymore, and I've got it in writing. I've also already talked to the local police, and the guy I talked to basically corroborated my neighbor's story by saying, "Oh yeah, we've spoken with him before." At this point, many other things have happened. He's hidden in my bushes, possibly vandalized my car, left me countless letters, and followed me all over the place, even though he had a no-contact order. Then randomly, I get an email from his friend in the military. He's being deployed, and before he goes, he wants me to promise him that I'll take care of the Stalker. What? You see, the Stalker's told him that I'm the perfect woman, and he wants me to swear that I'll take good care of him because he's a special guy, and if anything happens to him, I have to promise to marry him. I print the email out, and I don't respond. Literally, 6 hours later, I get an email from a different address. It's the guy from earlier's brother. Apparently, my stalker's been killed in duty because he magically got from the middle of nowhere Midwestern United States to Afghanistan and got himself killed in 6 hours. Anyway, he tells me that he hopes I'll make good on my promise to marry the Stalker. Haha, no. This comes to an amazing conclusion when I get a text message from an unknown number. Stalker is in the hospital, and he's dying of his heart condition. This is the only lie that's been believable so far, because he was morbidly obese and did have cardiomyopathy, which everyone at the office knew about after he passed out one time. Anyway, he doesn't have long, and he's asking for me. I bite and ask what happened. Well, this is his friend, who claims they found him unconscious at his computer an hour ago. But there's one problem with this. I've been keeping an eye on one of his online accounts, and it's logged on, and it's been idle for under a minute. I text back and say I'm not coming, and not to text me again, and then I block the number. Stalker shows up at my apartment bawling and begging me to give him a chance. Wow, he got out of that emergency room in a hurry. I laugh in his face and call the cops. I jump through the hoops to get a restraining order. Thankfully, a few months later I landed a new job and moved. Several years later, he messaged me on Facebook. He said he's very sorry for the way he behaved and wants me to know that he's now wheelchair-bound and paralyzed. I click on his profile, and in a wheelchair and paralyzed translates to slipped on some ice outside the building and broke his ankle, and he's on crutches. I blocked him, and thankfully, I haven't heard from him since. This was back in 2014. I was 16 years old at the time of this story. I was still in high school and was in grade 11. It started out in September when my dad was at work, while my mom was at a friend's house dancing. So I was alone with my brother, who was younger than me. I was on my computer playing a game on Facebook. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a Wizard of Oz themed game. While I was on my computer, I was chatting with a few friends. I wasn't allowed to get Facebook until July of 2014. That was around the time my mom let me have social media. She was paranoid, as well as my dad, so they gave me some rules to follow while using Facebook, such as don't add people I don't know, etc. I'd been following the rules, so my parents weren't concerned about me breaking them. However, they always wanted to make sure I was okay, since I'm on the autism spectrum. While my mom was dancing, it was on a Friday night, meaning it was the weekend. I was up most of the night. While I was making myself some dinner, I heard the house phone ring. It wasn't far from my computer. Now, most of the time the phone would ring, it was scammers, telemarketers, school, and people looking for my parents. This was before my mom and I had cell phones, so my dad was the only one that had one at the time. I went to answer the phone, thinking it was someone trying to reach out to my dad or mom. However, when I picked up the phone, I saw that it was a phone number I hadn't recognized or known. "Hello?" I asked on the phone, and waited a few moments before I heard a voice on the other line. "Hello, Bella. I'm Robin." It was a man's voice with a Middle Eastern accent, so I knew he was from Pakistan or India. First of all, I know my dad knew someone by the name Robin, but I didn't know who he was, only that he was one of my dad's customers. Secondly, I want to point out my name isn't Bella. In fact, I first assumed this guy had called the wrong number, which happened every once in a while. I said to him on the phone that he had the wrong number since I didn't know who he was. He was making me feel uneasy. "Do I know you from somewhere?" I asked. "Yes, I go to the same school as you." As soon as he said that, I was not only unsettled by this, but more confused. How he could have gone to my school was one question, and another was, how did he manage to get my phone number? As far as I know, I only gave out my phone number to my close friends that I could trust. However, being a teenager at the time, I went along with it, thinking it was someone from my school. I talked to Robin for a couple of minutes before my mom called to check up on me, so I said bye to Robin before answering the call from my mom. It wasn't until Sunday afternoon when things started to get crazy. My dad was working as always, while my mom was at home doing what stay-at-home moms do. I was on my computer when Robin called, so I picked up the house phone and started chatting with him. While chatting, the conversation started to get very suggestive. He started flirting with me, which was weird considering he sounded like he was in his 30s. I was uncomfortable from this and told him to stop, but he wouldn't listen to me and started talking about flirting with me in public. I was a minor, so this made me uncomfortable, especially since I was just over half his age. Something wasn't right. My mom could tell something was wrong, so she stayed and listened to the conversation, while Robin and I talked for another minute or two. What he said next made me not only disgusted, but it was really messed up and made me uncomfortable. "You're my future wife, Bella. I want to see you." As soon as he said that, I hung up the phone. My mom got really upset when she heard that, and she asked me if I knew who this guy was. I explained to her how everything had started with the phone calls on Friday, and that I thought he was someone from my school. She then called my dad and explained what was happening to him. They said I wasn't allowed to answer the house phone, so I asked some of my friends on Facebook if they knew who Robin is, and unfortunately, none did. After my mom got off the phone with my dad, she told me that my dad was going to call the police to take my statement, as well as hers. When the officer showed up, he suggested that we change our phone number, but my parents didn't want to since we'd had it for many years, and lots of our friends knew that number. Monday, the whole school was made aware of this Robin guy, and they wanted to make sure I was okay, so they kept an officer near the front doors. My high school takes stalking of students seriously, so that helped me to focus on my work. Fast forward to 5 days later, I was playing on my PC when the phone rang and my mom picked it up. It was the same Robin guy, only this time he said his name was James Lockhart, asking for me, or Bella, which is what he called me. My mom called the police again. However, the phone numbers of this James or Robin guy weren't traceable, so they couldn't track down where the calls had come from. After James' fake name was said, I wasn't allowed to use the phone at all, unless the call was someone that my parents knew. This went on for at least 2 weeks. However, this is when things started to get a bit extreme. It was near early October, and I was making dinner when the phone rang. My mom answered it, but instead of saying anything, she was quiet. The man on the phone gave another fake name. This time he said his name was Jim. My dad was in the kitchen when all this was going on, so he headed for the phone to give this Jim person a piece of his mind. He yelled at the top of his lungs, "Don't call my daughter again," and then he shouted several obscenities. Jim hung up like a chicken, and my parents called the police yet again. My mom had managed to take down the phone number that he called from, and this time it was traceable, so the police were able to track down the location that the call came from. I don't know what happened to Jim, or Robin, or whatever the hell his name is, but eventually, I guess he gave up and stopped calling me. I was back to myself sometime in the spring of 2015, not having to worry about him ever again. It's been 9 years now, and I'm 25. I'm much more careful about who I give my info to. I'm not sure if the cops caught that guy or not, but I'd like to think he's in jail somewhere. God knows how many other girls and women there are just like me out there. I just hope I don't ever have to go through that again. I have a boyfriend myself now, and I'm doing a lot better than what I was.